I really have always been interested in what sort of computer cultures get formed. And the other things I've always been interested in is what do you have to know as a teacher in any of these computer cultures. I'm not going to talk about it, but that's always in the back of my mind. So I want to reminisce about the Logo computer culture. I don't know how many of you know, but I started Logo with Seymour Papert and Wally Feuerzeig. We started, Seymour was a consultant and I was working at Bolt, Beranek and Newman, where Wally was. Now I want to tell you about Logo. Logo started in 1966, where most of you weren't born. And Seymour, Wally, and it was summertime. And we discussed needing a programming language for kids. Our experience had been working with a language called Telcomp, which was like BASIC, except it was interpretive. And BBN used to sell it. So we did some work, and Seymour's great line was, teaching kids algebra through an algebraic language was not very helpful. So he went off to Cyprus, where he went to see his baby daughter, and was there for 6 weeks, and when he came back, he had the specs for a new programming language. And we met with Danny Barbaro, Wally, a guy named Dick Grant, who it turns out Eric's parents are friends with, see? And I found out he's a psychiatrist now. He gave up his computing life. We all sat around and we thought about this new language, which initially Dan called Ghost, because the big thing is kids were going to play with words and sentences. So we thought of it as Baby Lisp because we all in that room had a Lisp background. And we thought Lisp was pretty good except for parentheses and a few other things. For Seymour, Logo was the stepping stone to a math land. Everything we did with Logo was sort of reinterpreting mathematics as this, instead of, as Seymour wrote papers calling teaching children to be mathematicians versus teaching children math. And what that means is, of course, they were doing and being reflective. So the first version of Logo was written in Lisp on an SES 940. Dan started the code and turned it over. We debugged it in 1967 with a group of kids. I think there was a week-long course. And after that, we totally revised Logo. Logo went through many revisions until about 1972, I think, which was a short time. Anyway, Dick Grant was involved in writing this new version of Logo on PDP-1, which was time-shared, was one of the early time-sharing systems. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of computing history. And it was ready for us to do. Seymour and I taught, here's the first Logo class. These are 7th graders, 1968. There were 14 kids and 14 terminals. Some of the terminals were teletypes. There were Model 35s and Model 33s. I'll show you what they look like in a second. So here's Seymour, me, and this lovely young lady. And here is the teletypes. these were Model 35s. And here's what, in case you, this is the mechanism. And wonderful story about that is this was in a junior high school in Lexington, Massachusetts. And one of the kids who was not in the class we taught was considered illiterate. And he was in that class of things. He took one of the teletype manuals home, read it, and came back ready to help debug anything. I mean, we had stories like this. It's hard to believe, but they are true, and I'm sure a lot of you have had the same sort of experience through a kind of exciting computing experience. Kids come alive that other people thought weren't. So here, people keep asking me, in Mindstorms, one of the projects we did with kids was sentence generators. Oh, I know I was going to tell you this. I didn't start out being the teacher. We hired somebody to be a teacher. She was a regular teacher, a math teacher. And I was off doing some other stuff. And when I came back, it was the school year had started, and Wally and Seymour had been visiting the school, and then I went to visit, and I said, no way. Seymour was too hesitant to say anything, and this is an intellectual split between Seymour and Wally. Wally didn't see anything that needed debugging. What was going on was the teacher was teaching kids like what print was, very local little things, and I came along and said, we've got to do projects. We can't teach language. We have to teach using it for a reason. So that began, I took over the teaching and got Seymour to collaborate with me. So he would come out twice a week. This was in lieu of their regular math class, so we had the kids 4 days a week. And we chose these kids because they were average, some a little below and some a little above, but average, that's what their school testing gave them. So one of the projects was sentence generators, and one of the things that happened during this was a math educator from some other school system had been bugging me to visit, and I said, okay. She saw what they were doing, and she ran out of the classroom screaming, where is their math? Now, for the first time in their lives, kids said to me in this class, I see why they have verbs and nouns, because the first few sentence generators were gobbledygook. The child talking to Seymour is the one who did this particular thing. People keep asking me who it was, because this is a sample that was in Mindstorms. So at the end of that year, there were lots of funny stories, but I'm not going to tell them unless you ask. The Spring Joint Computer Conference. See, I'm giving you more history. There used to be two computer conferences. One was called the Fall Joint Computer Conference, and that was always on the West Coast, and the Spring Joint Computer Conference, which was always on the East Coast. And in 1969, it was in Boston. So Wally arranged, we rented a hall, we brought teletypes there, we brought kids there to demonstrate to a whole lot of educators. And the way I prepared the kids ahead of time was to say, you've got to be patient. These people will be dumb like you were when you started. And sure enough, at the thing, they would ask a kid a question and the kid could answer it, and then they'd run away. They wouldn't wait for the whole answer. And I've had that experience with teachers since then, too. Anyway, this, I just thought I'd mention that the first public symposium on Logo took place April 11th, 1970. And the people who were attended had been part of evaluating the 1968-69 project, and they were mostly mathematicians or math educators. Max Biberman was credited with starting new math. Bob Davis was discovery method. Andy Gleason was this incredible person from Harvard University who was just kind and generous and extraordinarily gifted mathematically. And then, of course, Marvin Minsky, in case you didn't know, for about umpteen years, Marvin and Seymour were collaborators, and they really collaborated. So even though Marvin didn't do much with Logo, he contributed to it. The first turtle, which I'll show you a picture of later, Marvin found in a Navy junkyard, and another turtle Marvin got one of the people in the AI lab to build. And then there was Seymour, and then Pat Suppies. And Pat Suppies was Mr. Behaviorist. And at the time, and for many years, the most monetarily successful educator using computers with kids. He had a company that, because he did drill and practice, he was a master of drill and practice. So anyway, that's enough. That's it, probably. Now I'm going to show you some pictures. Oh yeah, this is Seymour on the bongo board and me poking him. That was before we taught kids to bongo board. Okay, here's, in 1970, we worked with some fifth graders. And for the first time, we had a display turtle that the kids could use. These were execuports, and we were so proud to have them. There was a Supernova computer driving the graphics display, and everything was over a phone line back to a PDP-10 at MIT. At the end of 1969, Seymour and I split from Wally and BBN, and I joined him at MIT, and we formed the Logo group as part of the AI lab there. This is, Marvin built this music box. It was a 4-voice music box, but we never really used the 4 voices with the kids. Jean Bamberger got involved with us about this time. Maybe some of you know Jean. She's a music specialist, and she liked 1 voice. But that music box doesn't work anymore, but it sits on Marvin's mantelpiece. Yeah, here are the turtles that yellow thing is the one he got at the Navy junkyard, and then it was fixed to be a turtle. There was a big 12-volt battery inside that had it chug along. These were tethered, and that was, it doesn't come out clearly, but you'll see it in this picture. This is the first turtle we used with kids. And this is the kind of things, bird turd, elephant, face, these were the kinds of projects the kids did.
Let a child learn mathematics by speaking in mathematics about things that really matter to him. So at MIT, we've given computers the power to turn motors, to make sounds, to draw pictures, and we've found ways of giving children the power to control the computer. Now they'll put their little tunes together to make a bigger one.
Sometimes I get into bugs like this, and it'll, when it was doing it in his mind, the little turtle, it's the little triangle thing, was on an angle, so it drew the picture on an angle.
A computer-controlled turtle is made to draw and dance by programs so simple that all children invent them in the first days of the course. Thus the child acquires a taste for math power that grows and grows as his projects become more original, more complex, and more varied.
Well, the next big event for Logo was the summer of 1972. There was a math education in Exeter, England, at the University of Exeter. And it just so happens that Digital Equipment Corporation, otherwise known as DEC, was selling a PDP-11 to the university. And we had implemented Logo in a dedicated time-sharing environment on a PDP-11 at MIT. And also, the person who did that, the chief programmer, his name was Ron LaBelle, in case you ever run into him. He also built these display computer stations. I don't have pictures of them, but four of them were also shipped. DEC shipped turtle and display turtle stations and the computer, because they were selling it, they could leave it there, to Exeter, and I went over with a big group from MIT to work with kids before the conference. Margaret Minsky was in high school, and she was my chief assistant. And that started for us a collaboration. Margaret and I still collaborate on different things. Anyway, as a result of that conference, we started a company called General Turtle to make turtles available. And see, there's a General Turtle. And here, Marvin built a Logo graphics station. And this is the kind of graphics it could run. It was a vector graphics display, and Brian Silverman, those of you who know, just wrote a simulation of that, which I can show you separately, which can spin. It's really nice. Apparently, there was a point where I decided to get some degrees, and at the time Marvin's machine was available, there was a 3-year project in Brookline where somebody taught kids, and they were using these machines. I didn't see it. Here's the next thing for me, was starting Logo Computer Systems. And I was the manager or the director of the Boston office. And most of the people there had been Logo folks at MIT, and they joined me there. And I ended up having to write the introductory manual in a very short time. And I sacrificed a lot of things writing that manual. I decided not to talk about little people, little men, and some other things, because I thought people would get tired of the jargon. So my next experience with Logo was I became director of Atari Cambridge Research. Alan Kay was chief scientist at Atari, and he set up different labs. And Alan had been aware of all the work we had done, and came to see us before he designed Smalltalk. And one of the things he was determined to do with Smalltalk was incorporate music, animation, graphics, turtle stuff. And of course, Alan was a musician, a painter, and a heavy-duty computer scientist. So those would have been things that he would have valued anyway, but there we were emphasizing how important they were. So he set me up, and I'm just going to run through, it's time for me to quit, what we did. Our goal was a 5-year goal of creating a PlayStation of the future, was a logo-based thing. We were going to do color vector graphics using Atari arcade monitors, and we developed an object-oriented logo. I'll show you stuff. So we also, LCSI built an Atari logo, and this was a child that was using Atari logo, which was a really nice logo.
I found that a lot of ideas that I had had that I could never get anyone to develop just fell on the right soil, and I would mention some gadget like this cooperative joystick so that 3 people can play Pac-Man for a quarter instead of 1, and I'd come around in a few days and Max would have actually built the thing, and Gary and Margaret and other people would have written some software, and all of a sudden I would see this thing that I had sort of vaguely imagined, which was working better than I had ever dreamed.
And there's Margaret. She was still my collaborator. And what that is a force feedback display built in 1982. And here's the kind of thing you could do. You could finger paint. The more you press, the bigger the blob, as Margaret would say. I cut her off, so. And you could also, if you were talented, like that's Tamiko, and she's a talented artist, and she made that wonderful drawing for us.
This is the first touchscreen.
It was a force feedback touchscreen.
What is the first touchscreen?
The first one I knew of. But it could have, people, we had all these great MIT graduate students who would, because we were near MIT, we could suck them in. They were friends, but Dan Huttenlocker, he's now head of some new Cornell graduate program in Manhattan. He did most of that stuff. And in 20 Things to Do with a Computer, Seymour and I mentioned making a puppet, but it took till 1983 when Mark Gross made this thing, and I cut out the movie part of it. But I have, online, there's a movie of it. And then there's Q Logo, which was the object-oriented logo. The person sitting there, Gary Drescher, had designed several versions of logo and had built the first Apple logo for LCSI. And then there's a force feedback joystick. And Margaret used that for her doctoral work. It was when Atari closed, we were only operational for 2.5 years, and we did a lot in those 2.5 years. But the only thing that the new Atari wanted was the force feedback joystick. They took Mark Behensky, the designer of it, with them, and he made a force feedback steering. Well, he made it for us. That's what they wanted. We had a force feedback steering wheel. They took that, and it became part of Hard Drive and their most popular arcade game. But, and then this was the music person, which